Yes, first I'd like to welcome our newest member to the ITalk, Caitlin. I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Gary. I'm Caitlin with Murphy Development Company. We are a San Diego-based industrial and office developer with a lot of focus in Otay Mesa and Scripps Ranch. I am excited and honored to be part of the committee, so thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to learning a lot from everyone here.
Great, thank you. Welcome aboard.
That's a challenge for us.
So the first item, the minutes from our last meeting.
I move approval.
You move to approve?
I do.
Do we have a second? Second. Okay, all in favor?
I won't vote on that one.
Okay. Next, do we have any members of the public for public comments? Okay. Then the consent agenda. Sarah has an update for us. I don't know if we have any particular questions or. No? Okay. We will move right along. To accommodate the schedule of one of our outside guests, we're going to shift the order a little bit, and we're going to bring forward item 6 with Mark from Davis Farr and Lisa to talk about the fiscal audit, if you guys are ready. Didn't mean to surprise you there, but are you okay to proceed?
No problem. We're ready. Good morning, everybody. We're at the end of our fiscal year 16 Trends and Compliance Audit. This is the final piece. It does take a whole year to go through this. So what we'll do today is Mark will take you through the final steps, and then we'll come back to me. This is an action item, so we have a recommendation once Mark is done, and any questions that you have. With that, put it over.
Good morning. As Lisa said, we are at the point where we're just about ready to issue final reports. We did present all the draft reports to you back at your March 8th meeting, and subsequent to your approval, we went to the Transportation Committee on March 17th, presented the draft reports to them. Subsequent to their approval, we went to the board on March 24th, presented draft reports to them for approval. Since the time that we issued the draft reports to you, we did have 2 reports that had significant changes. The first one was MTS, and if you recall, at the meeting we discussed that they were not in compliance with their rail operator eligibility. And they had discussed with you the option of excluding certain non-cash items from their calculations. Those non-cash items consisting of their change in their liability year over year in their pension liability, as well as their workers' compensation liability. And at that discussion, this particular year, the expense had gone up, so it was going to be helping to reduce their operating costs. But there was some discussion at that time that once we go down this path about adjusting these non-cash items, that year over year we're going to have to make those adjustments. Sometimes it's going to be positive, sometimes it's going to be detrimental to MTS if their expenses go down or their liability ends up going down. You did approve that at your March 8th meeting, and the Transportation Committee and the board had approved those adjustments as well. The second significant report that had changed was for the City of Lemon Grove, and if you recall, they had a maintenance of effort shortfall of about $21,000, and they had come to you asking that that shortfall be tiered over the next 3 years. You did approve that at your meeting, got approved subsequently by Transportation Committee and the SANDAG board. And so over the next couple years, or next 3 years of reports, in their results section when it comes to maintenance of effort, we'll be tracking for you how they're doing on curing that maintenance of effort shortfall. Those are the only 2 significant changes to the draft reports you saw back in March. All the other reports did not have any significant changes. With that, I'm available for any questions you may have.
Anybody? Okay, I think we went through most of it when you were here the last time, so not surprised there aren't any further questions.
Okay, so we have a recommendation today. The ITOC is asked to accept the final fiscal year 2016 Transnet fiscal and compliance audit reports as prepared by the independent certified public accounting firm of Davis Farr LLC in accordance with the agreed upon procedures, AUP, so the final audit reports may be issued.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had to check my calendar to see whether I was here in March or not, because I didn't remember any of that, but I wasn't here. So it's comforting.
Okay, so next then, Ariana, would you share us your
No
update on the
problem.
transportation committee boardings?
Yep.
Hey, could I ask a question? Just, I apologize because I wasn't here in March, but it's a done deal. And I think and I'm in Grove with a $21,000
Yes.
shortfall in their
21.
maintenance of effort. What was the discussion that they needed 3 years to cure that? Was there something unusual? It sounds like even for a small entity, that's a small amount of money, and 3 years is a hell of a lot of time to make good on it.
Yeah, but the ordinance allows 3 years. So we typically, suggest to them, just take the 3 years. It doesn't mean that they have to, they have to spread it over 3 years.
They weren't asking for 3 years. We just granted it because that's what the max allowed.
Right. Just, err on the side of caution there. Just give them the time so that if something were to occur, they're
Because
safe.
the essence of the ordinance is maintain discipline, that they do in fact maintain their level of effort and
Yes.
not fall afoul. So that's why I was curious about the 3 years.
Yes.
Got it. That's what happens when you miss a meeting.
Questions are good for me. So since your May meeting, the Transportation Committee received the usual quarterly presentations on the Smart Growth Incentive Program, Active Transportation Grant Program, as well as the Senior Mini Grant Program. That was on your May meeting agenda. The board approved RTIP Amendment number 5, which was an administrative modification. You saw that at your last meeting. And then in May and June, the Transportation Committee also discussed preliminary options for conducting the first ever 10-year comprehensive review. That hasn't come yet to your committee, but it will in the near future because the ITOC plays a role in terms of providing recommendations as part of that effort. The board also approved its overall fiscal year 2018 program budget at the May 26th meeting, and that included approval of the ITOC operating budget for fiscal year 2018, which you recommended that the board approve back in February, I think it was, at your February meeting. Staff also presented the usual quarterly overview of developments in the financial markets and the quarterly financial report. That was on your May agenda. And then you may recall that the ITOC had previously requested regular updates of one of our regional bike early action program projects, the one in Encinitas, the Chesterfield to G Street project. And last year we shared with this committee that SANDAG and the city of Encinitas executed an agreement that kind of outlined the roles and responsibilities and the timelines so that we could be sure to stay on track to receive our state active transportation program grant. And we have been working, staff has been working very diligently toward meeting that grant schedule. And last month, so this is a project that is in the North Coast Corridor Public Works Plan. So the California Coastal Commission has a role in making sure that that project is approved before proceeding to construction. So last month, the commission voted to support the prior alignment. So there was an east alignment, and then the city had voted to change the alignment to the west alignment. I don't know if you recall that, but so anyway, you're going to see this as an RTIP amendment at your July meeting. So we'll be bringing that back to you.
So city wanted a west alignment, coastal commission approved an east alignment?
Correct. So SANDAG had originally worked toward design of the east alignment, then the city approved a west alignment, and then and now the coastal commission approved the.
If I can maybe add a little to that, so because we try to work with our cities, but this is actually a SANDAG project, so it's not so much that the city approves, right? But we in the public works plan had started with an alignment that had the rail trail going on the east side of the tracks. At the city's request, they wanted to move it to the west and put it along Coast Highway, which arguably, from my perspective, probably the best place to put the bike path, because there's a lot of bike activity there today. But we then went to the Coastal Commission, the notice of impending development, to say, you know, this is how we're going to comply with the Public Works Plan. And staff recommended against that, so, you know, we went before the Coastal Commission, and so the Coastal Commission rejected our request to move it to the west, and their basic argument was that they didn't see this as new versus the one on the east being new. And so the Coastal Commission, on a split decision, voted against the notice of impending development and voted to approve the one that they had approved before on the east side. So now we went back to the board, because we do have a fair number of challenges and risks in trying to meet our timeline. We have, in order to secure the state grant, we've already executed our one-time, what was it, 22-month extension. So we got to have this ready to advertise by February of next year. But now that we move back to, because we stopped working on the east side once the focus was on the west side, and we had probably about 60% of the project assigned, but it still hadn't been reviewed by NCTD. It still hadn't gone, you know, we still have to get all the federal and state permits that we need, and those haven't been secured yet. And so we brought back to our board a proposal to augment the budget. The one on the east side is also more expensive than the one on the west side. And now our goal is to try to do everything we can to achieve that $1 million grant that we would get from the state. But I just want to take this opportunity to highlight with the ITALK here is that it's a tall order, because we got between now and February to actually have this advertised. And a lot of the risks that we have are sort of areas that are outside of Sandag's control. Like when we go to Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife for a permit, you know, we get in the queue with them, and hopefully we can entice them to move this forward. But that's where our board was at in terms of actually voted to augment the budget so that we can go get this project done. We asked for a budget amendment of up to $5 million. That $5 million would assume that we don't get the state grant, so that we're going to do our very best to try to secure that $1 million. But this project is part of mitigation, part of the overall public works plan for some of the work that's happening on both the rail corridor and on I-5 today. So important project for us to get done. So now that Coastal Commission has spoken, we want to stay focused and get that first phase done.
Follow-up, if you don't mind. When you say they didn't view it as new, so there must be an existing bike lane that was going to be improved to be different class?
So if you look at Coast Highway today, you know, there's, if you go there on a weekend, for example, there's a lot of serious bikers that bike up and down that corridor, and they bike today on the shoulders. And so, you know, what this project would have done is it'd enhanced, we were staying within the road footprint, where they'd have built new stuff and built a new project. Coastal Commission didn't see it that way, where the one on the east side is totally new. I mean, it's a greenfield, it's basically, you know, a dirt path through there today.
So the city and Sandag both came to the commission and said this is the preferred.
Correct.
Sometimes I don't
And
follow Coastal Commission's logic.
But Coastal Commission didn't see it that way, and so.
Was it the commission or the staffers that killed you?
So, well, ultimately the commission, because they voted a split vote. Yeah, but what I thought was interesting is, you know, we hired some help to go help educate individual commissioners, and commissioners in the Coastal Commission can accept to take an ex parte, or they can refuse it. The ones we were able to talk to and help them understand why this was a good thing, they all voted in favor of our notice of impending development. The ones that we couldn't talk to did not vote for it, and so it was a combination of both staff's strong recommendation and the overall Coastal Commission believing that they didn't have enough options and that this wasn't totally a new project, even though our argument was that it was.
Are you allowed to divulge the consultant that you used?
Yeah, we used Dave. I don't want to forget their last name now, but I can get back to you with the name. It wasn't they're from Orange County, and, you know, they kind of focus on reaching out to commissioners. I forget their last name now, but I can get you that name.
In order to get the $1 million, what do you have to do? What ability do you have to finesse and
So
come up with?
we've got to have the project ready to advertise in the contract register. So in essence, we got to have a project that's, you know, designed with all its permits, have to have right-of-way certification, and that's the requirement because we competed for one of these state grants under the active transportation piece. And
$1 million is a big prize. Can you just advertise a design build? And
well, because we got to, it's a little bit more complicated than just design build because we got to have permits in hand.
well, I understand that, but
And we got to have right-of-way certification. And in terms of, actually, the controlling item here is not contracting. The controlling item will be the environmental and permitting stuff.
so those are your hurdles.
Yeah.
Resource agencies.
What kind of timeframes do those typically involve?
Can take 6 months to a year to get permits, depending on where they're at in the queue. And so here we are, you know, in June. So, I mean, we don't, look, we're going to give it our best. And you know, I still think we have an outside chance to do that, but it's not without risks, right?
It's not money in the bank.
It's not money in the bank. And there's, you know, we get into the hurdles of, then we, our own selves in front of these permitting agencies. Well, $1 million sounds like a lot. It gets in the way of something that we're doing with Midcoast that could cost us more. You know, Midcoast is probably going to take precedence. So sometimes we find ourselves in front of the resource agencies. Well, all right, Sandag, well, you know, you got 10 permits in front of us. You know, what is your priority?
Curiosity, lessons learned. How did you lose it with the staff at the Coastal Commission? I mean, you guys were so persuaded that I have to believe you're logical people and you had the right answer. Why did they see it differently?
You know, it came down to they just didn't see this as being new, and what was and we ourselves were in an awkward spot because we started on the east side, right? We started saying this is the project we all thought we should do. City Council changed on us, and as a result of that, we went to the west side. So, you know, when you get into these situations, you got to argue why your old idea was not as good as your new idea, and that's always tough when the staff's kind of bought into the east side already.
Just a couple more things. In May, the board also approved the TIFIA financing method for the Midcoast Corridor Transit project. We've been updating the committee on the benefits of using TIFIA, and once that loan is closed, we're going to be returning with a final recap as part of your overview of financial developments, the quarterly review of that. And then finally, in late May, the ITOC Selection Committee met, and they did reappoint Brad Barnum and Dick Fortman for an additional 4-year term. And then, as you heard, Ms. Arduino is now also appointed. So.
It's going to make 10 for you eventually, isn't it?
Would this be an appropriate time for maybe Jose just to give a brief update on the plan of finance? I'm not sure.
Sure. So the current plan right now, I should back up. When we last discussed the plan of finance, we had mentioned that we wanted to incorporate 2 major items into the update. So one of those is the TIFIA loan. We want to incorporate the actual interest rate and debt schedule associated with that. And as Ariana mentioned, we're still working on the TIFIA loan. We hope to close on June 27th. That's the date that the TIFIA office has provided to us. And then the other set of updates that we want to put into the plan of finance is related to Senate Bill 1, which is the transportation, the new gas tax and new vehicle registration fees that will be funding a set of new programs, some of which will directly support the Transnet program. So we would like to incorporate at least our preliminary assumptions for those revenues into the plan of finance so that we can make it a more complete, given what we know now is moving forward. So given those 2 things, the CTC is working hard to develop their guidelines, California Transportation Commission, for all of these new programs. And so right now our plan is to complete the update to the plan of finance during the summer and bring it to the ITOC and Transportation Committee and the board in early early September.
Do you have to apply for the SB1 funds, or are they?
In some cases, we will have to apply. There will be competitive programs. It's not a single program. It's at least half a dozen programs. Some of them are existing programs, some are new programs. And some of the programs will be competitive. Other programs will be distributed on a formula basis. And so those are easier for us to determine how much we may be able to get. For the competitive, we'll need to, take a closer look. But yes, we will have to be applying for some of those programs.
You assume by the end of summer you'll have clarity out of Sacramento on how that process works?
We'll have some clarity, Depending on which program you look at, the commissions will either funnel the funds onto existing programs that have existing processes, so those will be easier for us to know what the likely revenues will be. For the others, the commission has had as a goal to complete the development of the guidelines by fall, issue calls for projects in the fall as well, and then identify the projects by spring of next year. So for some of the programs, we will have greater clarity.
You're committed to put ink to paper regardless of the status at that point in time?
Yeah, I mean, there will be, for some of the programs, they will likely be preliminary figures, and especially for the competitive ones, I mean, we really won't know until they're actually identified, right? Yeah. So.
Two things I would add to that one of the debates even in the competitive program is to have some of the funds be designated by formula and then a competition within that formula, and others be competitive statewide. And so that's a debate where everything from 75% of the program being competitive, 25% being by formula to 50-50. That's the debate that's happening right now. And so the trade corridor program in the Prop 1B bond was probably a good example where San Diego was a corridor onto ourselves versus the LA, Orange County, Riverside corridor where they competed amongst themselves. So that's something that's unknown. The other thing I would share with the committee in terms of SB1 and and the plan of finance is the governor, the Secretary of Transportation, and the commission are real anxious to put these dollars to work. So there's a real focus on, you can't sit around and talk about what the rules are going to look like for 1 or 2 years and then go do this, because people's gas taxes are going to start going up as soon as this gets implemented. Their registration fees are going to go up, and so there's a real focus, I think, at the state level. We need to get going on this. And the beauty of what the legislature passed is that you hear a lot about the $5.4 billion, $4.2 billion over 10 years, but this doesn't have a sunset, so it goes on forever. So there's a big pressure from the administration to let's put the money to work. And so we in San Diego want to be and are working in Sacramento to say, look, we've got projects that are ready to go right now.
You figure that might be one of the competitive factors is shovel readiness.
Yes.
Cool, thank you. All right, can I follow up on that on SB1? The cities and county, all the local cities are getting some substantial money here. Do you see, I'm curious what the impact would be for the Sandag dollars they're all going to get too. I mean, the combination of the influx from SB1 and then what they're getting from the Sandag Transnet dollars, does that affect what the percentage that they might spend on their local roads, maintenance,
before you get the answer,
congestion?
you're saying the cities will get money directly in addition to the money that Sandag will get for the benefit of the city?
I think so. For instance, the county's getting they're getting a portion of this revenue.
Normally, the cities get a portion of the gas tax today, the gas subvention program. That comes directly from the state to the cities. And SB1 will, in essence, double what they're getting right now. So it's like twice what they're getting right now. And so that matched with what they get out of Transnet, literally, gets to where, they have like 3, maybe a little bit more times what they would get, or at least they would. So this is a substantial investment for cities.
I was just wondering what they do coming in here and spending 70% they have to spend on Transnet dollars that go towards congestion relief, and then 30%, no more than 30% for maintenance. And most of those dollars are coming in for maintenance, aren't they? The dollars that are coming in for the state, is that supposed to go to maintenance? Or?
No, there's flexibility in the state dollars. That's kind of their gas subvention money. But the Transnet program, that 70-30 rule is really more from a maintenance versus rehab. So, they can use their 70%, as congestion relief to rehab roads. And I hope what this does for our cities is it gives them hopefully a bigger amount to invest in fixing the roads and fixing them right so that they last, because there's always a debate as to the easiest thing you can go out and do is slurry seal a bunch of streets. And some of our cities do a lot of that, and they look pretty good for a while, but a slurry seal is sort of a very short-term strategy for its sealing cracks up, not necessarily fixing structural problems in the road. And hopefully, this influx of money will allow cities to be able to do more substantive fixes on some of these roads, so that hopefully you're in there and to fix it, and you don't have to come back for another 10 years or so.
Are there any use it or lose it provisions related to that money, so that there are any time frames by which it needs to be spent, or because the backdrop on that one Dick is laughing.
Jonathan's not here.
And Jonathan in particular, if you were here, would highlight the fact that certainly for all of the 3+ years I've been on this committee, there have been issues with certain jurisdictions and their ability to even spend the money in the first place.
Yeah. I'm gonna look to Jose, but I'm not aware of any use it or lose it. But what there is a lot of accountability in the measure. So the CTC is now going to be looking over cities in ways they probably hadn't had to do in the past.
Yeah, if you look at the existing gas taxes that go to the locals, the dollars are collected, and essentially a check is written and sent to all of the jurisdictions, and the rule is that you have to spend them for transportation projects. But currently there's no use it or lose it or anything like that. The SB1 does have some general guidelines in terms of performance measures and accountability, but it leaves it up to the CTC to define those. So that's the work that the CTC will be doing over the next few months to give better definition in terms of what the rules may be.
So at least there won't be any notion that those dollars need to be spent before our dollars, and it'll just multiply the dollars left sitting around that we regularly talk about.
Does that cash flow directly to the city, or is it drawn down like the ITOC dollars or the Transnet dollars are drawn out when the city needs it? Does it just flow from the state?
It would go directly from the state to the city.
So they don't spend it, they're just sitting on it. And are the dollars that come to the local cities a function of the gas tax collected in their jurisdictions? Or is it?
No, it's population and vehicles registered in that jurisdiction.
One thing I would highlight with the committee, and we're continuing to have discussions, I think we have examples where we've had some mixed results in terms of success, but we have a service bureau here. And so, as our work turns down, one of the things I think our model here is we've been blessed to be able to hire really good project managers, and then we use consultants to do a lot of the work. And through our service bureau, offering services to the cities to help accelerate, their getting projects out. And so, we've had some success in that. Santee's probably a good example where, they needed project done fairly quickly to not lose development dollars, and we jumped in and were able to help Santee that way. So we are continuing to have discussions with our cities about how our service bureau might be a tool for them if they choose to use that.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next, Veronica. Veronica has been working diligently on back and forth with some committee members on updates and evolution of our annual report.
Yes.
The latest draft of which we have in front of us.
Yes, so provided
to you this morning is a copy of the revised draft 2017 ITALC annual report. So this version of the report includes both changes from you, the ITALC, at the May 10th meeting, as well as changes based on feedback from the recently appointed ITALC annual report subcommittee. And I just want to note that the subcommittee not only revised the draft report that we presented, but also provided new content for the report, and that's on pages 1, the executive summary, and continues with to page 2 of the special note regarding the ITALC special note from the ITALC regarding forecasts. So I just want to leave the remainder of the time for you to review this report, and I wanted to note especially that the major changes from the last time you saw it are going to be on pages 1 through 4. So if you want to focus your review there, anything else was minor or were inclusion of footnotes to tables for clarity.
Thank you. I just want to throw out to the committee what would be the preference as to take some time to read through it here to provide some comments, or Arna mentioned that if people want to just take it home and have a little bit more time, if we can get comments back by the end of the business day, that kind of keep us on schedule. So whatever works best for folks.
Well, I think from the last time we were here, the special note from on the forecast issue was the big issue. The other item was the pie graph on, what was that, page 4? The discussion on that, right?
Yeah, just to point out, for those who saw the prior draft of the special note on forecasts, probably the biggest difference is that staff asked Ray to do a review for accuracy, and I think there were some additions he suggested for purposes of clarity, so that might read just a little bit different than the prior draft.
Sort of a more, there's a little additional detailed information there, which.
Yeah, I don't know, Mr. Chair, I thought it was a great summary you all put together. I think you and Dick put this together, and Roy added to it, but it's a little long, and I'm just wondering if, and it just sort of, it's a busy front 2 pages that one of those scare readers off a little bit, and I was just trying to figure out a way to either shorten it or put it somewhere else, and maybe in the back or something that it's not, because I think the graphs and the information about sort of the activities are important, and not just right up front. I mean, that's a lot of writing on that first page. Just my gut feeling. So it just seems a lot of reading material versus a graph or something that's more visual for, I don't know, it's just a gut reaction I had when I first saw that. I mean, it's split up into 2 pages, which looks better. It's not just one full page of writing.
So, in the past, or actually, I've seen some publications where they have maybe like a short introductory paragraph, say like in the front, and then if you're interested, sort of the remainder is towards the back. That way you wouldn't be scaring anyone with a bunch of text. They could go straight into the graphic, so that could be an idea to maintain the content, but just kind of reorganize the order a little bit.
If you had a separate insert, is it just too expensive to do? A 1-page insert?
Well, we don't actually do physical printing of these anyway.
Yeah, we take care of this in-house. It's
these are
low budget, and then it just resides on your website. So it's, yeah.
I would suggest I would offer your alternative of taking the rest of the data, line it up on it. I certainly understand Ray's giving his economist accuracy here, but from the idea that this was the president's message from the layman's point of view of what ITALC has understood from all this dialogue. For example, parentheses, Series 13. Right, anybody in the right mind knows what else Series 13 is. You do, and you need to know that. The rest of the people don't.
I was trying to err on the side of being
I realize
accurate.
And I think that's all those wrenches of all those errors, I would yank all that out and make it shorter, to Brad's point.
I mean, it reads well. I mean, it's a great summary, and then it puts a positive, it's important to put the positive, complete spin on it.
It gets the
Spin,
story
but
out.
It keeps the story out about the projects under transit, construction costs. I mean, I think that's important to add, but it's just a little long. Okay.
Bottom line that I think our intention was is that this big flap over the forecasting error is the work on the tail of the dog. There's so many other variables, much of which are beyond the control of anybody in Sandbag, that give rise to how much project we get built and how much we don't get built. And I think this does that, but it probably could be shortened down.
Okay, why don't we all perhaps then take till the end of the day, and hopefully if you get comments back, they won't be conflicting and create conundrums and
don't take offense.
Like most are, too many words, just take out the ones you don't want.
Yeah, and I would ask Ray's indulgence that if, to echo Dick's point, if we potentially, for sake of clarity or understandability by the, let's call it the average taxpayer out there, sacrifice a teensy-weensy bit in terms of the just absolute specificity, for example. I also thought the concept of the Series 13 versus whatever is probably understood by a total of 30 people in the entire world. So, just if you would indulge that, we're not trying to not be accurate, but we really want to focus on the understandability of the layman. Let's say.
No, I understand what you're saying. I think the thing that I was trying to point out is that the error that we found was in the Series 13 forecast. This graph and the numbers that you're referring to were the Series 10 forecast from before the Great Recession. So we had, in the paragraph, it had mixed two things: the errors that we found and the Great Recession and slower population growth as being three contributing factors. But those are from two different forecast series. And maybe I'm a little overly sensitive right now in terms of which series we did what in, but this, what I try to do is to break it up and say this happened with Series 10. Population has changed, it has slowed, and the Great Recession has decreased the amount of collections we have. That's one message, and the other one was that error was in Series 13. But if it's too complicated, we can certainly take it out and shorten it. This is now accurate, and whatever you guys want to do to it, it's okay, and I'll make sure that it's still.
We don't want to make it inaccurate.
No,
but there's way too much information for the average Joe out there.
So let's.
What is, can I ask just a simple question? The purpose of this document is, what is the purpose of this document? It's for the public to understand what this committee is doing, and it gets posted online? Is that what?
It's actually, it's
required by the ordinance.
It is required by the ordinance, for one. It's the way that you communicate both the results of your fiscal audit as well as your triennial performance audit, both to the public and to the board.
Okay.
But I think it's also an opportunity, because I think it's important that the I in this ITALC not get lost, right? And that it's an independent taxpayer oversight committee, so it's your opportunity to communicate in an independent way to the public about what it is you're doing.
Yeah, and just a little bit further background. Dick initially raised the concept that, if you go back in the past 6 months, there's been so much dialogue in the public arena, much of which is probably confusing, even to people who are trying to pay attention. So the intent of this special note in particular, which is not a common feature of this report, it is something new, is really in response to that, and a little bit of an effort on our part to try to help the average taxpayer, if you will, understand a little bit better the full dynamics of what goes on in terms of the forecasts relating to projects getting built and whatnot. And as Dick said, it's a lot more complicated than just here's the forecast of sales tax revenue, but it's also difficult to communicate the full picture to people. But this was an attempt. And so as a newcomer, actually, your feedback is probably a lot more valuable, because we're a little bit of inside players at this point.
Who do you want the comments sent to? Veronica, Ariana, the committee, or the subcommittee, excuse me, or?
I would, if you're willing to, to continue to put
Can you
up
just
with
send this in a one page, can you send this in a Word document? Well,
Yes, I
it's
can.
Word
It'll be
document, and we can
easier
just.
Yeah, that would be the best way to do it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
That would
track
be
the
helpful.
changes then to, okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, whoever wrote this piece of it, just to compliment you guys on, for example, the scope piece that you guys highlight here, because this is complicated stuff, right? And so, we're trying to figure out some project that's 20 or 30 or 40 years into the future. I got to compliment you guys because you did a better job than we have in terms of trying to explain, scope issues for you.
That's what the public needs to understand, that it's far from simple to be able to project for 40 years what they're going to get for passing a tax ordinance.
That's a challenge we continue to have going into the future, no matter how accurate or inaccurate the forecasts are, but just even on the scope issue, what a project looks like today versus what it might look like in the future is not easy.
Well, we appreciate that because at least I, who had a little bit of a hand in this, although Dick was really the catalyst and did the yeoman's work on it, was hoping that there wasn't a collective groan from the entirety of Sandag. It was like, oh my God, why do we have to keep hearing about forecasts? But I think, the point being that the better job that we can do to help people understand the full complexity of it, benefits everybody.
And again, I think the key is that in sort of it being independent, right? So I think that adds value. If you guys are an independent body are looking at this separate from our eyes, right? And coming to conclusions.
Gary, one of the other objectives we had talked about, you might not have heard of it, is to get in front of the public, which probably isn't well understood yet, the borrowing aspect.
Yes.
All the plus and minuses borrowing, but 15 years from now, I'll predict, I won't be here, but I predict that there'll be a flat bill. What do you mean you're not laying any more concrete?
Correct.
Because we're just paying debt service. So we got to precondition them that they're getting the benefits now, and there will not be that building down the road because almost all the money allocated to transit and highways is going to go to debt service, according to the numbers that I've seen.
We've been working with the board on that. And, fortunately, Measure A didn't pass because that had been new revenues that would allow more borrowing. But we have been working with the board on transitioning from a go-go scenario to a pay-go. Even our work with our policy guys that work at this all the time. It's not people want to see new concrete or new stuff all the time. And eventually, we're going to have to pay the bills, right?
There isn't a politician you're ever going to meet that doesn't want to spend tomorrow's dollar today. But the public is going to come to grips with that in the future, and there's going to be a flap. So the more we can precondition them, that there is a benefit, they're getting it now. Don't be disappointed later.
I and the agency thank you for that because, we need to do a better job there.
Okay, so we'll
Yes.
report back comments to Veronica.
Yes.
Well, you're going to forward to the group the Word version, which can be the basis for people then getting back to you.
Yes, and then once we select those changes, we'll also start to reduce some of the staff provided data in here.
Well, I guess I would just say, look, don't go too far in being proactive and wait to see the comments you get because, don't misinterpret Ray, the feedback we were providing.
No,
It's helpful to have that. And so as we all read through it, if you'll get comments back from some people saying, maybe we could do without this or that, that's fine. But I'm sure much of what was added and included will be helpful to readers. So.
Okay, and also this item was presented for approval today, but you don't necessarily need to approve today. There's also the option of us returning with another version of the report for your review again, and then postponing the presentation to the Board of Directors from June to July. So it's up to you how.
Yeah, so this is a question for the committee. Do we feel like changes at this point are really going to be largely for readability and not so much in substance that we authorize ultimately, I guess, Veronica and staff to take the changes, make them, and just go with it? Or do we want to see another version back at the committee, which would probably push us
And you have
the July
I would
board?
strongly argue that we delegate to the editor-in-chief the responsibility of taking whatever input you get from us.
Okay.
Use your best judgment and go with it, otherwise we can sit and wait forever to
So
always
you
do
can't-
something new.
And you
Send
have
a
your
red line
subcommittee
out
as well.
or anything? You have to approve something here at the committee. You can't, she can't send a red line out and then via email?
No, I
Because it
think
has
that
to
would
be
be
a
a
public.
Brown Act
Yeah,
motion, right?
okay.
To do something by email like that.
That's right, the Brown Act.
So we
We
could
have a
then do
problem with an
an
email?
approval subject
I
to
don't think we can.
an authorized final.
So
Are you
to
gonna run
answer,
up with the
uh,
emailing us that?
not to the
as well as-
subcommittee. We can definitely work with the subcommittee
Oh.
via email as we've been doing.
Okay.
That's no problem. We can do that. So
But then
you
what
could-
about,
You could approve in substantially the same form with the amendments that you'll be sending us.
okay, well,
and
we're,
then
we're the
if
subcommittee,
you
but what
want
if
to do that.
Caitlin and Dustin and, I don't know, if Jonathan or Kai would have any comments? Would they, this will be the last opportunity for them to provide comments then?
I would be able to provide my comments to the subcommittee. You guys can do what you see fit with those comments.
Yeah, I'm not
It's a
sure that
little
qualifies.
bit-
but,
Yeah, it's really the subcommittee, so that's
So-
why
so
the
then I would-
subcommittee was delegated.
I would be fine delegating it to the subcommittee to, in substantially the same format. And then with Veronica, we would approve it now, it would go out.
Of course, any changes you have, you can get to Veronica.
Right, so
And
I
we
would
still
still
have the
email
ability to make
everyone,
changes. Yeah.
I would still email everyone the Word document for the first round of
Can you do that?
edits, right? Or,
The subcommittee.
oh, to the
Yeah, that's why
subcommittee.
you can't do that to the others.
Okay. So then if, so this will be our only opportunity to get Caitlin's comments.
Could you send it to all of us? Or?
No, that's what we're saying is that we can't.
I will defer to your all's expertise. I mean, I could within the time frame of this meeting, but I don't.
Most of the
Yeah,
things that I was
prepared to
suggesting on
comment.
here are just words that are deleted.
Yeah.
I mean, this is great. I just, I think the subcommittee could probably do the work. I mean, I think,
Okay.
Yeah, my understanding
other
would
than
just
that,
be editorial to make it more readable, a little bit less long.
yeah, I could probably get rid of a couple paragraphs. then.
As long as that's
I
what we're
just
talking
heard-
about.
Yeah. Just word by word, eliminating words, not a whole.
All right, well, for sake of moving on then, we'll have, once you send a Word version to the subcommittee, we'll get back to you by the end of the day. And I guess if, in the unlikely circumstance that you get any comments that people seem to feel really strongly about that are directly in conflict with each other, as opposed to flipping a coin, you know, I'd certainly volunteer to, if you want to give me a shout to help resolve any issues.
And will you be taking action?
So then, yes, so then we are, I guess, the motion would be to approve the annual report subject to the, or authorizing the subcommittee to make additional, not likely to be substantive changes for sake of readability, to be done by the end of the business day today, with giving Veronica and staff the ultimate authority to make those changes and forward the final report to the board.
I second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Who made the motion? I didn't catch it. Oh.
Motion was Halpern and
Yeah.
seconded by Porter.
Thanks. Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. And,
Oh, so you're still up?
yeah,
Talk about the triennial performance audit.
yes, so I will now presenting the updated, this is the fiscal 2015 Council Triennial Performance Audit, the implementation of recommendations from that audit, and this is our tracking matrix. We did present about maybe a quarter ago the status of the items. So to date, we've completed 8 of the 18 recommendations. And for the other recommendations that are in progress, we've included an anticipated completion date for those remaining recommendations. I do want to note that the most recently completed item is item number 18. This was the staggering of the ITOC terms. And also, there's an item here, very second page of the tracking matrix, is CMUC projects, both for the Midcoast Sandag implemented and the Caltrans implemented I-5 projects. So this one, there has been much progress to date. We didn't necessarily label this item as complete. only because these are a number of processes that have been implemented, but you won't see the results of any evaluations included in this until the end of all those projects. So that's a future ongoing item. And you also have a presentation coming next about lessons learned to date from the CMGC, from both of the CMGC projects. So.
Veronica, on your number 18, where you adjusted the terms and everything to prevent more than 3 members going up, how exactly did you do that? Because if I understood things, we just have 3 members here that are starting new terms, so I assume we would all end the term.
Mine's earlier than yours by a year.
Oh, so you're the solution.
Yes.
I get it. Thank you.
If I could ask, who was it that set the priorities?
Yeah, I talked to.
Yeah, I talked to them. Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions?
I guess this sort of has to go with the next performance audit, which the subcommittee has met. The CMGC issues, that a lot of them are in here, and later on there's going to be an evaluation of how it went. Is that actually done in the performance audit, the next performance audit, as far as how that firm is going to look at those delivery methods?
Yes. Yes. So, so the subcommittee for the performance audit met, as you know, late last week. And so to review the scope of work for your next audit and kind of refine that, look at specific areas that you want the auditors to look at, one of which is CMGC. So continue the next step. You know, one of the first tasks for the auditors is to look at, you know, have the recommendations from the prior audit been implemented. So they'll look at that. And then they'll take it from there and say, well, you know, you've implemented all these processes, you know, the next step might be X.
So do they talk to, like North Coast and Midcoast, does the auditor then talk to the staff here, and they talk to contractors, they talk to?
Yeah, they will propose a list of interviewees for the subcommittee to consider. And so typically that is project managers, consultants, corridor directors, you know, prior staff that were in those roles. Things like that.
Performance audit was done
Partner
last time.
agencies, yeah.
The performance audit was last time, they didn't have those projects ready to, I mean, so now that's an additional scope this time around for the auditor, right? So that's interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how much time you take to audit that. I mean, that's a new assignment they've got, right, from the last time around.
New assignment?
In other words, that they're auditing this method, so it's going to take time to do that versus the rest of their scope and all that. So it's a matter of time, how much time they take to do that one affect all the other audits they're doing. Is that
The other parts of the audit, you mean?
Yeah, all the other parts.
I think that, you know, once the subcommittee decides on the scope, it will better, you know, give you a better picture of how much time. And so I know the subcommittee is working very closely with the auditor to make sure that everybody is on the same page before they develop their work plan and before they start conducting the interviews.
Two major projects are going to be audited.
We're working on
I
it.
think, if I can, to the point that, like, the Midcoast is an example, we're not going to be done with that till 2021. So there'll be pieces in what you're trying to, I talk maybe interested in, that if you don't catch them in this next one, they may need to be caught on the ones after that, because, you know, until we get done with one of these, it's hard to say, well, you know, how successful was it, and given the cost constraints and stuff we have, the North Coast corridor could be, you know, beyond.
That's a good point.
2021. So
certain
both
parts
of these, well, from a staff perspective, we're very enthusiastic and you know, seeing really good results, but we're not going to know for a while till they're done, right? So there may be pieces of it that you can do earlier, but Midcoast is an example. 2021 will be when we're.
I would offer some thought for the subcommittee as you work on this scope. The very word audit implies to me add 2 and 2 doesn't get 4. This is more an evaluation of the effectiveness and the reasonableness of this contracting approach. And does this auditor have prior experience in doing these types of evaluations?
Yes, definitely does have, and
I
yeah.
think we need to be very explicit on what we're asking them to evaluate.
Yes.
Just think of audit.
Yes, during your last audit, you asked them to look at the benefits, kind of provide an evaluation, as you said, of the benefits, the risks, the challenges, the opportunities with this delivery method.
Some of
So-
the candidate firms were in
Would continue that.
fact, accounting auditors who sort of try to morph themselves into these other things, but the chosen firm was somebody who's really very focused on this type of thing.
And also in our first meeting with the subcommittee and the auditors themselves mentioned, we've done this several times, so all our processes are gonna move a lot quicker now on the standard and usual scope activities that we perform, so we're looking forward to the new activities that you're gonna want us to perform in the new scope. So they're shortening their timeline. We did a really high level overview of the scope and the schedule. So they're shortening their timeline on the regular processes and opening up time to do the new work.
Thank you.
Who's on the subcommittee for that?
The subcommittee. On the triennial performance audit, it is, chairing it is Dustin Fuller, your chair, Stuart Halpern, Brad Barnum, who served as the chair for the last triennial performance audit, and Tracy Draker from an auditing subject matter expert perspective.
Do you guys actually come up with these recommendations?
Yes, so the
It's
auditor.
not the auditor that comes up with
The auditor does in conjunction with the ITOC, and as part of, it's kind of the result of their audit.
Well,
So
probably
after
key
they've
is that
interviewed everybody.
At the end of the day, it's the ITOC that's in control, and so
Yes.
you give, it's the instructions that you give your auditor about what do you want them to look at, right?
Right.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Any other questions before Veronica goes? Okay. So next we have last, in terms of formal presentation, we have an information item relating to the construction manager general contractor project. Alan from Caltrans and Ron Haggard.
If you could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just, Jim Lincecum, and Sandag staff, I'd just like to kick this off, because we talked about this at some previous ITOC meetings, just saying this was coming in the month of June. And it's here, and it's a great follow-up to what Gary said about how, both these projects are long projects, and both I-5 and Midcoast are long projects, but it's really cool now to look back over where we've been for a couple of years and see, well, you know what, would we do that again, and how's it going? And so, just as some background, we're delivering 2 mega projects, the Midcoast Trolley, John Haggerty is our corridor director for that, and the I-5 North Coast Corridor, which includes both rail and highway and lagoon work, and Alan Cossa from Caltrans. Caltrans is delivering that work, and Alan is the corridor director for that project. And we're delivering those both CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor. CMGC is a new process to Sandag. It's a new process to Caltrans because we've only had the legal authority to deliver work this way for a few years. But it's not new to the rest of the world. It's not new to the rest of America especially. Public agencies have been delivering work this way for years. So, but it is new to California. It's new to our 2 agencies. John and Alan are going to talk about it in greater detail, but just in a nutshell, how we select a contractor under Construction Manager General Contractor, CMGC, is it's qualifications based. And so you select the contractor, and then that contractor, they provide input into the design. So you can figure out when you're trying to build a trolley line through our second downtown up at University City and through the University of California, San Diego, how do we best do that? Well, you have the contractor at the table with you to try to figure out what's the best, most efficient way to build that mega linear construction project through a dense urban area. The way I like to explain it to people, if you were remodeling your house, you would never do it the way, just a pure low bid without ever having conversations and negotiations with your contractor. That would be crazy, right? It's the same thing here. We're having these conversations and contractors' input so we get the best value. And it's also, it's just a great way to deliver, as we think right now, to deliver these mega projects. And so they provide input into design, they work with the stakeholders, and then we negotiate a price. And that's CMGC in a nutshell. As we talked about, your last performance audit said you wanted us to come back and report on how we're doing. Well, both these corridors are now out in construction, and so these guys are going to tell you how we're doing so far, and a little bit of background about CMGC just to refresh everyone's memory. So with that, turns Midcoast over to John.
All right. Good morning. I'm John
Question
Hagerty.
before you start the details, there's a nice lead-in and overview of what you did. The alternative approach, the old classic approach where you do all the design work in-house or with outside expertise and then put it out to bid. And that is a typical mode in that old approach that you would have gotten a firm fixed price bid for that fully designed project.
We would have gotten a unit price bid that says the contract, let's say concrete for a retaining wall. The contractor is going to bid $800 a cubic yard for that concrete. If that wall turns out, and we think it's 1,000 yards, if that wall turns out it's 1,100 yards or 900 yards, he gets paid that $800 a cubic yard for that concrete because that's what he bid. So it's a sum up of those unit prices.
Gets adjusted for the number of units.
And adjusted times the number of units. That's exactly right.
Independent interference and complications, what have you.
And yes, exactly.
Because you never reached a point where your design is sufficiently definitive that you knew it was 1,100 versus 900.
We try our best to get there, but there's a relationship on, it's a curve on how much bang you get for your buck by adding more design time. And so there will be errors, and that's why we call it an engineer's estimate. And we have estimated quantities.
But Dick, one other thing I would highlight under the traditional process, we will spend several years designing the project. We think we've got the right mousetrap, the right design, then we put it out to bid. And we give contractors several weeks, maybe a few months at most, to give us a price. And so they either gotta take off their own quantities or use some of the quantities that we as engineers have put together. And then they price it out and they give us a price and they compete with each other. One of the huge differences I see here is we've got that contractor working with us as part of the CM portion of it from the very beginning, right? They're sitting down side by side with the designer. So as the quantities are being put together, they're there. And so they know a lot about the project. So when you're now negotiating a maximum guaranteed price, you've got a contractor that has been with us for 2 or 3 years designing this project and very knowledgeable versus our experience of past. We put it out in the street and all kinds of contractors bid on it, and then we ultimately end up awarding it to what we call the lowest responsible bidder.
And you have litigation.
And sometimes, well, and you know, it's a little early to say we're not going to have litigation on CMGC, but we tend to have. Our experience has been that there's claims and there's other complexities that we hope to avoid in this process because we got a very knowledgeable contractor that he knows as much about this project as we do.
I happen to be well familiar with this concept. I've been on both sides of that house.
Are you guys going to talk about how you select which contractor to bring in up front?
I think you
I'll talk
talk on
about
that
it,
slightly.
and if there's any questions, we can certainly address those as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Again, John Hagerty, I'm the corridor director for the Midcoast Corridor. I was at the dentist this morning, so if I slur more than normal, ask me the question over again. So I'm going to start out just to refresh where we are on the Midcoast Project, and so that everybody has a clear understanding of what it is we're doing. So the Midcoast Project is $2.17 billion, largest transit project in the San Diego County history, I believe. It's going to be an 11-mile extension, so it's taking the trolley from Old Town up along the I-5 corridor to the Golden Triangle area. When it's operating, it's going to operate as an extension of the Blue Line, so it'll be essentially a one-seat ride from the border all the way up to UTC. It's got extensive amount of aerial structure. Up in this top corner, you can see that dashed line. That's about 4 miles of aerial structure that we're building through the University City area. We have 9 stations. 5 of those will have parking in them. The stations, and I'll go quickly through them, but there's a station at Tecolote Road, one up here at Claremont Drive, at Balboa, and then you can't really define all the additional ones up here, but there's one at the Nobel Drive in the La Jolla Village Square Shopping Center. Then we're going to go over La Jolla Village Drive. There's going to be a station right at the VA Medical Center. Then it's a really short hop onto the west campus at UCSD at Pepper Canyon. It's near their Warren Field, their pool, and some of their engineering building complexes. Then we turn to the right and we go east and we cross I-5. And then we have a station on the east campus at UCSD, which is directly across the street from Scripps Hospital, right next to Thornton Hospital, and immediately adjacent to their Preuss School. Yes?
So where is it that you do that crossover from east of the 5 to west of the 5?
We do it, yeah, so we're following, and starting down here, we're on the east side of the coaster track. We follow the coaster track. This bridge is where we actually fly over, and so the coaster track is going to head east. We need to continue north, so we're going to fly over with the LRT on a bridge structure in Rose Canyon, and then we go up underneath SR-52. We go underneath La Jolla Colony, Gilman Drive, and then we follow the I-5 on the east side, just south of the Mormon Temple. We cross over to La Jolla Village Square, and then we continue north on the west side of I-5. And then right at Voigt Drive, we cross back over onto the east side.
So the crossover from east to west is just south of the Mormon Temple?
Just south of the Mormon Temple, the first time.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll cross back. And then we have a station there, and then we have another station. Then we continue on from the UCSD campus heading east into Genesee, right at Genesee and Regents Road. We get into the center line of Genesee Avenue on a structure. And then a station at Executive Drive, and then a final station at UTC Transit Center. There's actually track beyond the end of UTC Transit Center, so we call it tail track, just so that if we have a train problem or anything, they can get out of the station, we can continue to operate. It'll include 36 new light rail vehicles. They're below floor, about 21,000 folks we expect to board on opening day. This project has a full funding grant agreement. So that's a contract with the Federal Transit Administration to fund about a little more than 48% of the project cost through federal participation. We've started construction. We expect to open in late 2020 or fall of 2021. Any questions on the project before we go on?
Is that federal money in hand, or is it subject to annual appropriation?
It's annually appropriated.
So it's at risk for annual
It's basically expected in the full funding grant agreement to come at $100 million a year. Our first installment didn't quite make it to $100 million. Jose can go into the details if you want, but we're expecting that over 10 years we'll get essentially $100 million.
The whole thing is at risk for annual appropriation.
Yes.
So given what's going on in Washington now, that's a risk.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of managing that risk, that at least the feds up to this point have said, agreements already under our belt are our first priority. So the fact that we got an agreement with them, that we expect that, it's.
You're one at the top of the stack.
Yes, and what likely would be more at risk, and we're seeing that in this current year, this future new projects that are in the pipeline for full funding grant agreements, those they may be at higher risk because of the appropriations piece, but at least generally, the federal government has said, look, if we already have an existing agreement, that's going to be our priority.
What happens with this contracting mode you're in now? So you embark, you're ready, you're digging dirt, and all of a sudden something happens in Washington, and even the priority projects get curtailed or cut back somewhat. How do we deal with that? Do we have alternative sources of funds that we swap around and alter our priorities, or we have to stop or slow down?
So partly we're borrowing from Transnet for some of this project, but then the TIFIA loan, I think you guys have been hearing about, then becomes another tool. And so we'll try to manage cash through the whole thing. And use
it's up to you to manipulate funds one or another and borrow as you save.
Yeah, and actually, I would say that the financial plan partially already reflects the scenario that you talked about, because the FFGA total amount is a little bit over $1 billion. And so what the feds have told us is to not assume more than 100 million per year. So it's going to take us at least 10 years to get all of the money, right? So we're already anticipating having to advance through other instruments, whether it's TIFIA or whatever, because the project construction is only going to take about 4 years.
Just out of curiosity, does that create an additional political risk that if cuts are being made, somebody could say, well, we had this agreement, but the project's already finished, so we're sending them money to repay their sources as opposed to sending them money to complete a project? Does that sound like a wacky question? But do you know what I mean?
No, I understand, yeah, sort of, you already paid for it. And so a big piece of this is a loan we have with the federal government. So I guess we would counter and say, well, let's not pay your loan back, right? I don't know how that would work. But, so far, other properties have done similar things. So this is not brand new.
Yeah.
And I think it's that funding agreement. It's all in the documents we have. And that full funding grant agreement has a financial plan that was part of this. So Stuart, I think things would really have to go haywire. But I think it's not a wacky question. Somebody could say, well, we already paid for it, so we're not going to give you any more money. So.
And this slide is going to cover a little bit about what we talked about before. But on our past LRT extensions, we regionally, the region managed basically multiple low bid contracts. And then the agency, either in the past MTDB or SANDAG, owned all the interfaces between the contractors, because there were multiple contractors on these large projects. And so we saw a number of constructability challenges with the designs that came out after the contractors got on board for the reasons Jim and Gary already talked about. We experienced a fairly high volume of change orders, and we had several claims coming out of those. So for the Midcoast project, what we did is we went back and examined the contracting methods available. Low bid, we looked at design build, and we basically, the third option is really the CMGC process. There's several alterations of that, but that's what we looked at. With the goal in mind that we really wanted to improve our constructability coming out of the gate, improve our cost and schedule certainty going into the full funding grant agreement. The FTA is very concerned about your schedule and your budget going in before they write that full funding grant agreement. So we felt this gave us a little more cost certainty going into that. We needed to coordinate multiple projects. There's a slide coming, but within this Midcoast corridor, we also are determined that we needed to build a bridge over the San Diego River for the coaster. We had 3 miles of a little more than 3 miles of double tracking that needed to go on, and they were all going to be fit in the very narrow coastal right-of-way along with the LRT. And so we wanted to put those in, and then when we talked to the university, they had projects that we were going to work together, so that all of these projects, they wanted us to basically go get all this work done on the university at one time and get out. And so we knew we were going to have more than one, essentially, project under this CMGC kind of contract, so that all of those interfaces between all those contracts could be dealt with, and the agency wouldn't have the risk for all those interfaces. So again, like we said, CMGC is a best value alternative. One contract, we basically landed on the CMGC because we felt it was this best fit for Midcoast. It's best value, so the contractor is, as we said, selected based on experience, their approach, and for the FTA we had to include a cost factor. They needed cost as a part of the evaluation. In CMGC, the owner provides the design. So we are doing the design, where we did the design through our own consultants, and the contractor it's a two-phase, so they provide construction support in the pre-construction services phase, and then we negotiate a price for construction. The advantage here is what we've talked about. We have early collaboration. The designer gets to work with the owner. The CMGC gets to work with a designer, the owner, and all of the stakeholders. There's a process where we're doing value engineering and constructability review continuously during the design process. And then at the end, we negotiate a guaranteed maximum price for after the design. Before the design is complete, we can actually negotiate a guaranteed maximum price. These contractors are experts. Generally, a contractor has enough information, somewhere between 65 and 100% of the design, to really dial in their cost of the project. From that point on, after 65, closer to 80% design, what they're looking at is changes in details that really aren't driving the cost of construction. So at that point, we can negotiate a GMP ahead of having the final designs. So what we expect to see is fewer change orders. We've had the contractor involved in the design. They've also helped us with a lot of the things involved in the staging of both the work, the permits, and the property that we need to do the project. So our contractor is a joint venture. It's Stacy Whitback, Herzog, and Skanska. Their joint venture partnership is known as Midcoast Transit Constructors, and they go by the acronym MCTC. Stacy Whitback and Herzog have done extensive work on light rail in the San Diego area, and Skanska is a contractor that's done a lot of structure and bridge work in the area. And so based on that, this is how we've put together the contracting. We have essentially the blue bar in this shows what we consider the master contract. And so we have one contract, and then we let supplements under that contract for the construction work. And so each of those supplements is a separate guaranteed maximum price for that specific work, and that's approved by the board. And then we execute the contract and the construction goes out. So all the green bars are successfully negotiated and approved supplements under this one master contract. So we've had a contract out and continuing to work with wet utility relocations. They also did some work in the low sand corridor, which is where the coaster runs. The San Diego River Bridge was successfully negotiated, and that's under construction now. In fact, that's, I think, one of our better success stories. Right now, that's running ahead of schedule for construction, even though it flooded out. We're building the Gilman Drive Bridge. If you've been on I-5 near the university, all of those big cuts just north of La Jolla Village Drive are a new arched bridge that's going over Gilman Drive. That's being built by our construction manager, general contractor. Midcoast is let. We started construction. We let the contract in September, right after the FFGA, and they've been under construction for about 9 months. A lot of the early work was, they went through a winter, and so both being heavy winter, and a lot of this is in some of the creek and river areas. Construction really started to see the big results of construction earlier this spring. And then the Elvira to Marina double track project is also under construction. And we've hit some major milestones on that by getting certain tracks completed ahead of Midcoast, so that those tracks are out of the way and we can continue to build Midcoast. So we've got 2 more supplements left. One of them is for Voight Bridge and street improvements, along with the LRT, especially on the east side of campus. We're doing some roadway improvements and changes that the university wanted that are integral to the final operation of light rail. And then we're doing a Rose Creek Bikeway later this month. We're going to go to the board and ask them to approve the GMP. And the Rose Creek Bikeway is starting at SR 52 and heading south along Santa Fe Drive. There's an area where a lot of bikers go right now. There's a bike path. It will be a bike way when we finish construction, but we're also doing the Rose Creek and the LRT in that same area with a lot of overlapping utility relocations and other construction. So we threw that into this mix as well so that we could be efficient with one contractor, reduce the interfaces, and move forward with the project.
John, a quick question on the Nobel area. All that work's being done. It's unbelievable how much is being, some of the towers for the rail are going up. Is that being done right in that area because you're doing work already at UCSD for the bridge? Is that why that seems to be a busy area?
You know, this contractor put the pedal to the metal once they got through the winter, and they're working on virtually all 11 miles. So if you go up there, we're working on the I-5 corridor. The only place they're really not working heavily right now is, say, south of Nobel. There's only a little bit of work, but yeah, some of that's the Gilman Drive Bridge, and some of that's the benches they're putting in on the west side of the freeway, going behind the Whole Foods and Sheraton Hotel. And then there's a lot of work going on at the VA station right now. So yeah, they're out there really moving a lot of dirt right now. And if you get on the university, there are columns, a number of concrete columns already cast.
This is a question for our environmentalist over here. All the eucalyptus trees south of the temple, there's going to be a lot of elimination of trees and all that. Is that the whole neighborhood over there? Are they aware
Yeah,
of all that's going to happen?
We've had extensive outreach with the La Jolla Colony, La Paz. We've actually extended some of the sound walls in those areas. Ultimately, from the environmental side, once we build the trolleys, there's probably going to be less freeway noise, but we will have to take out a lot of those trees, and we're replanting trees on a 1-to-1 basis and in view corridor 2-to-1 basis.
It's amazing through there to see what's going to happen.
But they won't all go back where they are today, because there's going to be a lot of places that won't have that.
To your first question, I think one of the drivers for where you see stuff is contractors also trying to optimize how much false work they need. So I think what you see happening is they're putting false work and building the elevated structure in areas where they can go right now, and they'll be done with those. So then, right now, they're also widening the street at Genesee because we got to move the street, we got to move the roadway out to make room for the guideway that goes over the top. So if they manage this correctly, they'll optimize their false work so they'll get pieces done where they can go right now while they're widening the street, and they'll come back in and use that same false work to do the next phase of it.
Gary, what is false work?
So false work is the temporary scaffolding that holds up the structure, the guideway, till you actually get a chance to pour it and stress it and reinforce it so it doesn't need to be supported anymore. Temporary scaffolding.
How much of all that work is done by your contractor versus them doing major subcontracting beneath them?
Right now, I think their total is going to be somewhere just under 50% of subcontracting. So, the primes or the joint venture will take about 50%, and then about 50% will be subcontracted.
And in this contracting approach, do you have any say on who they subcontract to?
We don't have direct say, and the way they put together their price is, first they had, in the pre-construction services phase, they put together a subcontracting and a community outreach plan and a bunch of other plans that they were, that's, I think, kind of the beauty of this, is we know what the contractor has to tell us what he's going to do and how he's going to proceed. So we saw their subcontracting plan that helps us with both the DVE and the small business interface. They've had to do extensive outreach, and in the selection process, they had to tell us how they were going to do that. So that was part of the selection. And this contractor has been true to their word in the outreach. It's been, I think, very extensive.
And what has been your experience so far in terms of the value, the quantity and the value of the input from him in the overall design? Did they come up with any real creative aha moments for you that you hadn't envisioned, that they proved to be far superior than what your concepts were?
There's one major one that we kicked out early on in the design, and then they agreed with us, but then in the pre-construction services they brought back. And this is, like Gary was saying, all of this structure, the 4 miles of structure, is basically cast in place. So you pour the columns, then you build false work, and then you put all the formwork in, and then you pour the concrete, let that harden, and then strip out this false work, then you have a bridge. On Genesee, they said, we think we can go precast and save money and time. So when we get to Genesee, down the center of the road, they're going to do precast construction. So we're going to set in 2, what we call kind of bathtub beams between the columns, and then they're going to pour the deck for the trolley to run on top of that. And that was one of the things they brought. And there were a lot of retaining wall changes that they brought to us. And that's, I think, where the contractor knows best. What's the best retaining wall for this? And we had places where retaining wall, we've gone to slope paving. So we kind of cut the wall back and slope paved it instead of had a retaining wall. And that saved us money.
And one final question, or one further question. Guaranteed max price. That is not sufficiently descriptive. Is there a target price with a sharing ratio on either side of it, or is it a cost plus with a max price? What's the contract?
Let me jump to the next slide because I think that helps.
If you're coming to that, wait.
No, yeah, well, and I think we've gone over this. What the CMGC is, it's pre-construction services, and then you negotiate and have a construction contract. But the way we did our GMP negotiations, I'm going to start at the bottom where it says direct costs. So we've got a set of plans and specifications. They may be close to, some of that was 100% or more, you know, at 100%, some of it wasn't. But what we did is we went through and did a takeoff of our quantities, and the contractor did a takeoff of their quantities. And we brought in an independent cost estimator, we call them the ICE, and this is a firm that's dealt with, actually, the firms we have on our joint venture in other properties, acting as the owner's representative. They build the cost up the same way the contractor does. So in this case, the first thing we do is we put all the plans and specs and we agree on quantities. So like Jim said, there's estimates, but we want to make sure that our estimates line up, that we have the same amount of dirt moving, that they have the same amount. Once we've gone through that process, they go and cost out the project, we go and cost out the project, essentially using the exact same methods. And then we come together and negotiate the cost for the direct cost. So we'll have arguments about production rates or other elements of work. And then the next step up is we negotiate the indirect costs. And the indirect costs are obviously it's your supervision, your office, your quality assurance, the outreach that we have them do, and then mobilization and insurance. So all of the things that aren't directly building something get negotiated out separately. And again, our independent cost estimator worked with us on that. And then we negotiate the risk. This is the part where we've tried to strip all of that risk out of the direct costs and the indirect costs, but the contractor still has risk. I mean, are his subs going to perform? Are his, you know, is he going to get delivery on time? He has to coordinate with a lot of folks out there, and if somebody messes up that coordination, there's a cost to them. So we have to give them a reasonable amount of risk in there, but we also have negotiated certain risks that we control, and we'll take those risks, and risks that they control, they take. A good example here was if you're doing construction and you go past any construction site nowadays, you see gravel bags and hay rolls and everything on the sides to control runoff. Well, that's really tricky in a low bid contract because the contractor gets paid by the hay bale or the roll. He's just going to throw a bunch of them out, you're going to pay for them. If you limit him, then you could be in violation, and he will say, it was your problem, you didn't pay for enough of that. We negotiated in this contract, that's their responsibility. We gave them a lump sum. For the 5 years that we're building, they own all of the costs and all of the risks for doing that stormwater quality control work. We've taken on some of the risks we've taken on are typical risks, getting utilities out of the way, providing right-of-way, and anything that's underground. We could have sold them all the risk for any unknown or man-made buried objects or large rocks that weren't in the geotechnical report, but then they would have had to price that risk into their project, and they would have wanted some significant money. So we've gone through and evaluated the risks and priced all those out. In design, bid, build, those are in there. You just don't get to see how the contractor priced them. And you don't know what he underpriced or what he overpriced. And then we needed to have one final item in here, which was some kind of cost element. So what for the FTA, so what we did is we had the contractors essentially bid in the selection process their fee. And we set ranges on the fee, and everybody came in at the exact same fee. So that really wasn't very beneficial to us in the selection process, but it resolved an issue with the FTA.
And what is the fee based on? Is it just
It's just essentially their profit for the job.
Right, but what does the fee get calculated off of?
It gets calculated off the rest of the GMP price.
The whole three other items.
Yeah. I like the fact that that gets taken off the table, so whatever they propose, that's the profit they're gonna make. And on other contracts, you never know where they're in a normal way. You don't know what their profit piece is because it's all built into all the items that they gave you.
But what is that? I still don't understand. It says 5%. 5% of what? Is it a fixed fee, dollar fixed fee, based on a preliminary estimate of cost? Or is it a percentage fee on actual cost?
It's fixed at the GMP.
What's fixed, dollars or percentage?
It becomes a lump sum. The whole GMP becomes a lump sum. So once we've done it, it's dollars. Yeah.
But just to add to that 5%, so that's not necessarily what the contractor is going to end up profiting, because if we negotiated these production rates and they can improve production, or if it doesn't rain for the next 4 winters, and they can, they get the benefit of that, then probably they will produce a little faster and they'll make a little bit more money. But then they also take the risk that if it rains over the next 5 winters and their production rate slows down, that number will probably go down.
So it's a firm fixed price contract. I don't understand why you call it a max price contract. It's firm fixed price.
Yeah, you convert it essentially into a lump sum price.
I think the reason we call it guaranteed maximum price is that, there are places where we may come in and add scope or add other things that would cause that number to change. So it's based on the scope of it, the renegotiated.
Firm fixed price, you have a change order, you're going to increase the firm fixed price.
If it's outside the scope, yes.
If it's outside the scope.
Firm fixed price.
Yeah.
I guess I'm more familiar with design build, but this sounds similar to that. So I don't know if you can explain the difference between those two, or because in the design build process, the contractor's up front with you and working on everything with you.
And I think we evaluated design build in this context, but if you have a single site and you're closed in and you're just building a building, design build makes a lot of sense. There's not a lot of influences that can happen. But on 11 miles, I've got permits I need to deal with, a lot of utilities to relocate, a bunch of other stakeholders, Caltrans, the City of San Diego. And so there's not much that the design build team can do to control those issues. So they would probably have to pack a lot of risk into their contract, or you would have to take a lot of risk out of that design build contract and take it on yourself. Plus, we really wanted to do the design ourselves so that we have control over the design and the quality of the design. And when you go back as long as this, looking at the time frame, we've been doing work on this project for more than a decade, and the design has been going along. And at some point, you're committed to doing that design. And now, if you bring a design builder on, they can start from scratch. And now you kind of lost a lot of that time. So, based on this linear project, it's a method that allows us to have a best value and also fit the type of construction we're doing.
Kayla and I would almost look at it as kind of a hybrid between design, bid, build, and fully design, build, where this is kind of in between because we're hiring the designer. And in this case, I think one of the interest we had in controlling that design is that we know when we get into the UTC area that we're going to impact lots of businesses. We're going to impact the community that's pretty sensitive. We're going to impact the region's largest job center. And so instead of just pricing that out and giving it to some contractor and say, you go design build this, we wanted to have a role in there so we can control some of that and work with it. So I sort of see this as a little bit of a hybrid between a design build where and in this case, we hired the designer. So the designer worked for us in the design build piece. They marry themselves, right? They decide who the designer and how they're going to come together.
All right, so under lessons learned and best practices, we've completed the pre-construction services phase a while back. We're 9 months into construction. One of the things that I think even before we got into this, selecting the right team matters, and it matters a lot. I think we did select a good team. They've been really good to work with. But that's one of the lessons I think we learned from other properties. Some folks really love CMGC because I think they've been selecting the right contractors. Some folks say they'll never do it again, agencies, because I think it really matters who you get. If we had done it over again, it would have been nice to get the contractor on board perhaps a little earlier in the design phase to help us out. It's always a question of when you bring them on because that's a cost. But earlier in the design might have helped us out a little bit on some areas. We, as Sandag, have only done design bid build work and a couple design build contracts in the past. So this was new to us. And so if I had to go back in and do this again, one of the things I would do is I would be much more active in facilitating the designer and contractor and agency interaction. I think we tend to hold on a design bid build world our cards a little close to the chest, and we're not, that level of trust took a while to build up and understand, and there's a lot of people who aren't used to that. And so it was something that I think we would have done differently. The same thing with the stakeholders. We would go out with our designers and ourselves and meet with the stakeholders. you didn't always trust putting the contractor in front of a bunch of stakeholders. Knowing what we've done at this team, I think that would have been maybe we've gotten better results with some of the utilities and some of the other folks if we had brought the contractor into those negotiations a little bit more. Probably the most important thing, I think, lessons learned coming from us was we have to develop a strong negotiating team and CMGC processes, and we had to do it early. The first supplement for the wet utilities, we came together and said, kind of had lessons learned after we did that first supplement and said, these guys know a lot more than we do. They're a lot more experienced at this than we are. We need to figure out how we're going to strategize and be as smart as they are, as good as they are. So we put together our independent cost estimator, certain people on the design team. We have a consultant working with us who has a great deal of construction experience, and he's leading that team. So we put together one team, and that team has stayed together and negotiated every one of the supplements with the GMPs of the supplements. Because that was a place that if we had just done it willy-nilly and had each one, I think it would have been much more difficult, and we wouldn't have the results we're having now, I think, with the contractor. And then finally, or the other thing is to carry that core team forward. You now have a lump sum price for this scope of work. But like we talked about, if the scope of work changes or something changes in the field, well, you've negotiated who owns that risk. But everybody in the field doesn't know all of those details. And even the construction management team and even I don't know all of those details. So that core team needs to stay on board through construction. So they're looking at every change order to make sure that it's a legitimate change order, not within the scope of the GMP, and not something that we've already negotiated before with the contractor. So we think that's one of the lessons we've learned and we're putting into practice on a regular basis. And then the other lesson learned is, I think, that the contractor can really help you early on with the utilities and right-of-way and permitting. They help identify where they want to go to work first, what order of priority you need to work on getting these things cleared and taken care of with them. And some of that falls apart because the utilities don't always deliver their stuff on time, but you were able to work with them. And so I think that's kind of the lessons learned.
I think I would highlight on the utilities, not so much from a CMGC, but just a general practice that we need to sort of figure out better, is the utility companies have a franchise agreement with a city. And so, but they don't necessarily see us on the same level as the city. And so if you look at that franchise agreement, most of them, if you need the space for a public benefit, then the utility has to relocate those utilities at their cost because they're there as a convenience. And we did struggle with the utility companies because, of course, they don't want to spend millions of dollars relocating stuff. And the argument was, well, we don't have a franchise agreement with you. We got a franchise agreement with the city. And that's something that, at least with the utility companies, we've agreed that we're going to go to court probably in some friendly court lawsuit to sort of settle that legally, because we have their lawyers and our lawyers don't agree.
Can you not rely, as those agreements expire, that the cities can include you in the renewal of those?
We probably need to be more proactive on that, but we've tried to build almost all of this on public right of way, and so our utility companies are having to move out, and it's not cheap stuff; it's expensive stuff, right? And the debate then is who pays.
I'm still struggling with the max price concept because in my world, you're using the term differently than I'm analyzing. Because it sounds to me at the end of the day, you have a firm fixed price, subject to change orders and everything, but a firm fixed price. So I don't understand, given the firm fixed price, what's the relevance of a max price?
Honestly, the terminology came with the CMGC to us. And we went out of the industry and said, okay, what's out there? And you get a CMGC, and part of that is they call it a guaranteed maximum price. I don't even think CMGC is a very good title for what this is, but that's the current industry nomenclature.
It's not what I call the fixed price that you finally negotiate, or is it one and the same?
I think they're the same.
Yeah, they're the same. The guaranteed maximum price is essentially a firm fixed price for the firm fixed lump sum price for the scope of work you negotiated.
Firm fixed price.
Yeah.
So any underruns, they get 100% of benefit. Any overruns, they eat 100%.
Yes.
Right.
A good example example is, yesterday we had we bring the leadership teams to meet. And yesterday, the contractor talked about foundation work, which is always high risk stuff. And so far, the foundations they've been doing today, they've been dry. So it's a heck of a lot easier to go build a pile shaft or a foundation if you're in a dry condition. But when they crossed over to the west part of the project, they're starting to run into water. So how extensive that water problem is under a normal contract, that might have been sort of our risk someplace. Now it's their risk, right? And so they'll have to deal with that. If they're all dry, they're probably going to make more money, to Jim's point. If they run into a lot of water problems, they may not make as much money.
So just kind of highlighting where I think we have success with the CMGC method so far has been that FFGA to construction. We negotiated the guaranteed maximum price last winter, spring. We were still in the process of getting a full funding grant agreement. It took us right up until middle of September to get a full funding grant agreement, but by that time we had a guaranteed maximum price. The board had authorized Gary to execute a contract based on that price once we got the full funding grant agreement. So we did that within a day. And so we had a full funding grant agreement and a contract within a day.
That actually helped us with the feds, I believe, because on a lot of these light rail projects, they've seen costs go up, and that's always a risk and a fear for the feds. And the fact that we could say, here's our guaranteed maximum price, adds more certainty as we were negotiating with the feds.
Have you bonded
Yes.
for the project?
Yes.
And when you're referencing a GMP, is that inclusive of the 7 supplements that you showed on page 3?
Each supplement, we've negotiated a separate GMP for each of those under that master contract.
Okay, so it's...
And most of them represent separate individual projects, except for the supplement 1 where we did utilities across a number of projects.
Stuart, one of the drivers for that is color or source of money. So that's another reason why. So the full funding grant agreement and the light rail piece has its own sort of colors of money that comes to it. The San Diego River project, for example, where we're getting some state money and some of our own local money. So that's also been a driver because we need to segregate those costs to be able to demonstrate that we're using the right dollars to pay for stuff.
From a lessons learned point of view, are you of the opinion that you're better off by having multiple sub-packages, each of which has its own firm fixed price, than some global firm fixed price?
Because we would, some of those things were still being designed, like the bikeway, so we wouldn't even be into construction right now. So that's one advantage. And the other is, like Gary said, now we're able to really segregate the funding. And so the FDA doesn't care and doesn't really want us to mix the San Diego River Bridge, say, with the Midcoast project, because they're looking to us to keep that cost separate so that they can understand what they're paying their 50% for. And so that's why we kind of came up with that kind of master with supplements as a way of keeping one CMGC in charge of everything. And the benefit there is they own the interfaces between all of those. They know the projects, they own the interfaces between each supplement as well.
If I'm understanding everything I've heard today, I would just suggest you give some thought to changing your terminology.
Okay.
Because guaranteed max price implies, well, there's a chance we can come in under that, and I'm going to share in that under that. And that's not the case, if I'm understanding it. It's a firm fixed price.
There are agencies that try it that way, but it gets really complicated about how you measure that. And so when we did it, that didn't seem to work.
I fully understand that.
Yeah.
But I'm saying you have a firm fixed price, if I'm understanding your words. It's not a guaranteed max price.
One other thing that I like about the sub-packages, and we preach to the staff all the time that we can't fall in love with our projects. We got to be able to walk away from a project if we think the price is not a good price. And if you look at our traditional method, I can't tell you how many times we've broken up a big project into multiple phases, and you'll think that the contractor that's working on this phase ought to have a huge competitive advantage to bid the next phase because they're already mobilized. At least my experience has been more often than not, that's not the case because they're all sharpening their pencils. And this way we get a chance to negotiate that and we get to see their numbers and we know what their mob costs are. And look, if we don't like the price they gave us for San Diego River Bridge, we can say no.
Yeah, and we can bid it and we own all of that intellectual property that they put into it, so that's all ours.
So you don't have to do this on each of the 8 things that are sub-projects?
If we did not arrive at a price that we thought was fair and reasonable, we could take that and put it on the street and bid it as either another CMGC or low bid contract.
Each one of those 8 are negotiated separately.
I have a question regarding, I thought that as a public entity, you had to do a public type of bid. So how did you come to arrive at, and maybe I'm wrong in that assumption, but how did you come to arrive at these 3 contracting companies? Did they actually have to compete?
It's a joint venture, and so what we did is we had a fairly long selection process where we first kind of told the contracting community what we're going to do. Then we put out a request for proposals, and that request for proposal said you're going to build multiple projects under the CMGC contract. And so they put in proposals, we evaluated those proposals, and then we took that evaluation to the board of directors, who ultimately decided which contractor they would select. They had to make the final recommendation and selection.
Caitlin, that's the competitive process when you pick the contractor that you have to work with. And this was allowed by legislation too, right? I mean, so this specifically
that's great.
one of the pilot projects.
If I could just interject and say we only have 14 more minutes
Oh,
in the
okay.
chamber, so I don't know how much.
I'm going to I'll go quickly to Alan. Hey, we have some other successes here, but the real challenge, the thing is we're 9 months into almost 5 years before we open the project. So this has been a honeymoon phase. We've done a great job. The contractors worked with us from top to bottom, and we've got great communication. But there's still questions about costs, changes in claims, risk allocation, and then are we going to have this relationship continue on to the contract? So, sir, I'm going to pass it on to Alan.
Thank you. I'm Alan Costa with Caltrans. I'm your I-5, our North Coast Corridor Director. And just to kind of orient everyone to what the project is, remember when we looked at North Coast Corridor, we environmentally cleared a $6 billion project. The first phase that we're taking into construction we call Build NCC. It's about an $800 million project, so it's a subset of that $6 billion 40-year vision. And really the CMGC contract covers constructing carpool lanes from Solana Beach all the way to 78. 1 lane in each direction, as well as replacing 2 rail bridges, both at Bataquitas and at San Alejo, and restoring the San Alejo Lagoon. And that San Alejo Lagoon project is pumping essentially about 1 million yards of dirt out of that, or sand, out of that lagoon, and then recontouring it, replanting.
Restoring, it means you just dredged it? Is there probably more to it than that? But
there's a lot more
to it. Restoring means?
Yeah. Basically, it's filled in over the years with upstream sedimentation. Got to get rid of that and restore it back to its sort of original condition. Had we done this in a normal low bid environment, we probably would have put out 7 or 8 contracts in that. And what we have now is we have 1 contract. And as money, one of the advantages I see of that is the flexibility. As additional money comes into the corridor, you can decide to let additional task orders or additional contracts and be shovel ready. And that helps you be a little more competitive in this environment. We're ready, we're environmentally cleared, we're permitted, we're designed, and as additional money is available, we have a contractor already on board. We can just keep going down the road. So far what we've got is the green under contract with what we refer to as FSSW. That's our joint venture. Flatiron, Skanska, and Stacy Whitbeck. The first contract is about a $260 million contract that includes replacing the I-5 San Alejo Bridge, the Low San Alejo Bridge, and then the lagoon restoration. And those future projects are future task orders. John hit most of this about what is CMGC. We talked about best value, and I will emphasize that this is a Caltrans administered contract. The authority to do this is a legislation that Caltrans was given to do 6 pilots. So it's different authority than the SANDAG, than the Midcoast. Processes are similar. There are some differences. When we did our best value procurement, we looked at experience of the team. We looked at the history of these contractors working with the owners. How litigious were they? How cooperative and collaborative were they? And then we looked at their experience and their approach at dealing with our project. So it was a best value procurement based on those. I think we had about 7 joint ventures come in, and then we select from this joint venture. We talked about it being a negotiated contract. You know, on a low bid, they're essentially bidding these projects based on their interpretations of the plans and specs and based on best case scenario about what they're going to find in the field. And then, you know, on a normal project, standard project, that's usually okay. They're used to doing those kind of things. Sorry.
Just out of curiosity, when you reference the joint venture and the selection process, does this joint venture come together specifically for this project?
Yes.
So in effect, during the selection process, you don't have the ability to review history of the joint venture itself. You're actually looking at the individual entities and kind of crossing your fingers, hoping that they all work well together.
Yes. Okay. That is true. That's a very good point.
But most, not all of them, but like the companies we're dealing with here, they've joint ventured on a lot of projects before, so we do have the ability to look at some of their history in the past of doing these kinds of things.
And what's interesting is when you sit on a panel and you see teams, joint venture teams, that haven't worked together, it is so obvious that, and you don't want them to get that relationship on your job. Right. You want them to build that relationship on somebody else's job.
On Caitlin's job, right on the design build.
We have one GC, that's it.
So when we talk about the low bid, it is subject to their interpretations of the plans and specs on unique and complex jobs. You know, different people have different interpretations of what we're saying in our permits, in our specs. And again, they're doing best case. So we spend a low bid. Sometimes we will spend a lot of energy during construction reconciling what was meant by the plans and specs, right? In this process, you're doing that before you begin construction and before you price the project, and I think that's what's so important. That gets you that cost certainty. You can have those conversations with the contractor and with the resource agencies before they bid it. So there's a very good understanding of what it is they're building. You know, Brad knows as a department, when we do low bid, and if, in order to be fair to the contractors, if people ask questions, we say things like, "But as you see it." Okay, that's how we saw it, and then we argue about it. And frankly, when we're sitting in the middle of a lagoon, that's probably not a great place to have an argument about, you know, how to build this project. And I think what the department is kind of
this lagoon in particular, your foundation pieces are probably about as complicated as they come, right?
Yeah. We have foundations that go about 240 feet deep. This is the San Alejo Lagoon location. Down here is the I-5 bridge that we're replacing. This is the lagoon. We're going to be pumping about 1 million yards of sand out. And then the rail bridge is right there on the beach. Kind of hard to see, but it's to the far west there. And so the idea of complex, I was going to say that I think it's important that we have all of these alternative procurement processes, and then based on the project, you're really tailoring, you know, the project, what is the project with the right method, right? And so even CMGC has flexibility. Ours at Caltrans, this is not a GMP. We call it a GMP because, like John said, it came with the process. A lot of other states call it a GMP. But some of our items, we chose to continue measurement and pay it at measurement just because there was risk in the item. Maybe the item wasn't fully designed. Maybe field conditions were such that you don't want to negotiate that risk without actually building it. You will pay for it as it goes. So it isn't really a GMP like the traditional term. But I like that fact that you can tailor it. And I like the fact that you can negotiate it and have all of the assumptions cleared up before they bid it. And design build is kind of the opposite. Like Gary was saying, in an area like this where it's, you know, the cities have very important or very clear vision of what walls look like, what bridges look like. We can't have that negotiation of a better mousetrap. I'd like to paint it blue. Sorry, you can't paint it blue. We own that decision as the owner. And in an area like this in the coast, I think that's really important to be able to make that final call. Design build, you kind of lose some of that.
Gilman, the university wants it white.
Right.
We were able to accommodate that.
How many whites have we looked at? I mean, white is, everyone has a common assumption of what white is. So I think we've talked a lot, this idea of collaborating with means and methods. Certain contractors bring areas of expertise. As a low bid job, we traditionally bid a job or design a job to be bulletproof somewhat, and sometimes depending, it needs to be independent of who the contractor can be. And these foundations, when our team was selected, we've been able to modify the foundation designs because this particular contracting group has some expertise to do it in a unique way. So it allows us to tailor the design a little bit. John hit a lot of these, but what are the checks and balances protecting the public interest? We've talked about the open book estimating. We see production rates. We see what equipment they're putting on. The ICE, which is essentially retired contractors, represent us and tell us how they would have bid it, and that's very helpful. Like John said, we have the right of refusal. And since this contract team has been involved in the initial process, if we can't negotiate a price with them, they can't bid it in a low bid. So there is motivation for them to cooperate, and get to a negotiated settlement. We've got other projects in the state and the country that we're looking at for lessons learned and to get sort of, what not to do, and that's very helpful as well, kind of leveraging the other folks. Just like you guys, our legislature, state legislature is very interested in, is CMGC a good idea? There's six pilots going on, I think I mentioned that. We've put in place some performance metrics, so at the end of the project, we can report back to the legislature, and hopefully, we believe it's a good method that we'd like to have a tool in the toolbox, but these are some of the questions that we're asking along the way. Certainly price is one, but there are risks avoided, opportunities gained that you only got because you engaged the contractor early on. And so some of that is anecdotal. It really doesn't come out in a performance metric per se. And so that's part of what we're doing, is trying to collect that information. How has CMGC impacted DBE participation? How has it impacted quality? And how has it impacted the Caltrans cost of designing and administering it? Probably a little more effort up front to work with the contractor, make some changes based on their input, but hopefully our construction management costs are lower in the long run. Just kind of wanted to touch on some examples that the question was asked, how is this helping us? Back to my slide here, if we had let this as 3 separate projects, the rail bridge actually needs dirt in order to build the bridge. I've got to get rid of dirt. Had we bid it as 3 jobs, I would have paid a contractor to take the dirt away, and then a Sandag contractor would have paid another contractor to buy dirt and bring it in. If you go out there today, what you see is excavation at Loma Santa Fe on the west side, in the freeway right-of-way, contractors taking that to the rail job. Okay, so that integration there has been a big benefit. And the other thing, I piggyback on something John said, having the contractor involved in our conversation with the resource agencies has gotten us the flexibility because the contractor is credible with the resource agency. So we bid the job assuming they were going to have to bring a trestle in and not fill into the lagoon and hold the false work up on these new bridges, right? It would have been a lot cheaper just to build a berm, put dirt in the lagoon, fill in the water, and let them build from the berm. He convinced the resource agencies that that's a good idea from an environmental standpoint because he can get in and out quicker. And he gave them assurances that he could safeguard water quality. He gave them a very specific plan on how he was going to safeguard water quality. And so he brought the resource agencies along. As the owner, I couldn't have done that without him being there in the room. So it's been very helpful. And there have been times where they've suggested things and the resource agency said, no, that's not going to work. And so since we didn't price it yet, having that conversation again ahead of time has just sort of eliminated that conflict. Everyone's mentioned the utilities. We've already had some utility problems come up. In a low bid environment, depending on the contractor you get, you might get a contractor who folds their arms and says, owner, when you figure that out, get back to me and I'll remote. And obviously that is claims and those sort of risks. Our team has been very good about looking for what can they work on in the meantime. And they're re-sequencing the job and they're staying out of the way of the utility companies and they're not asking for a right-of-way delay. That's, again, back to this sort of anecdotal. It's kind of hard to record what would have happened had you gone with a parallel universe because it would have depended on who you would have got as the contractor. I made it. Next steps. As I said, we've got one out of the four contracts under approval. We've been working for about 6 months. The second contract, which is the restoration of the lagoon, we're currently negotiating with them as we speak. We should have that done by fall, that negotiation process, and then they're going to begin construction November 1st if all goes well. We're wrapping up the design on the next two highway sequences, and hopefully, depending on revenue and so forth, we'll be negotiating with the joint venture in 18 or 19 on that next lift of projects. And we, just like John, we have ongoing lessons learned processes. One of the things that I agree with John is not only does it depend on which contractor you have, but it also depends who you put in place, right? Because you're bringing a lot of baggage of 40 years of these owners and contractors working together in a low-bid environment. You kind of got to relearn some of those things, and it's a different culture. So you need teams on both sides to understand that. That's definitely a work in progress, but I think it's going well. We're collecting this performance data quarterly, so I think, like was mentioned, we really won't know the total outcome until the end of the project, because it's not really the initial cost, it's the end cost. And so we can report back to you guys on an annual basis. So, thank you.
Question? I just want, on behalf of
question?
I just I've known John and these guys a number of years, and Gary, you've done such a great job. Alan, you do a great job explaining this in layman's terms. I mean, I think that's important for us on how this all works. And AGC and the construction industry supports these alternative delivery methods because they do work in certain such situations, and some don't, some do. And so it sort of has made sense to, and the legislature, I think, gets it. And so they do need to hear from you probably, and I think ITOC's going to need to see how it goes in the performance audit. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But you do a great job. Thank you.
Have you had major change orders to date that were unexpected?
Not that they were unexpected, no.
Yeah, we've had the same thing. There were a few issues where we put in what we call a provisional zone because the design hadn't quite matured, and so we knew we were going to have to make some changes. Some of those actually went lower and a few went higher.
Okay, thank you, guys. Just the final pieces of business. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 12th. This is the meeting when we annually will select the chair and vice chair for the new fiscal year. So unless you want to be surprised with an assignment you weren't expecting, make sure and come to that meeting. So at least have some input there. Just want to mention that so people are thinking about that. And then finally, because we have to get out of this room, lunch is going to be in the boardroom for anybody who wants to stop down at lunch. So I think we're otherwise adjourned.